get ready to dim the lights and lock your doors. Friday Night Frights is here to haunt your weekend. Every Friday night, we bring you spine-chilling tales of the macabre, the mysterious, and the downright terrifying. From cursed artifacts to shadowy creatures lurking in the dark, these stories will keep you on the edge of your seat long after the episode ends. Are you brave enough to listen? Tune in and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more eerie episodes. You know, we've been doing this now for 2 years, actually over 2 years, and we have some really great stories we told in the very beginning, and I thought it would be kind of fun to bring back some of those stories. You know, they get hidden in the archives, and we have a lot of new subscribers that have not heard some of those old stories. So for the next couple weeks, we're going to be bringing back some of those great stories. So if you've already heard this, I apologize. But for those of you who have not heard our stories yet, enjoy these. The Devil's Dance by Ginger Winters. In the sultry depths of an enchanted midnight, where shadows writhe and whispers linger, the haunting melody of a violin begins to play. The air trembles with anticipation as the devil himself, adorned in ebony attire, moves from the shadows and takes center stage. With each step, the ground shudders beneath his fiery hooves, igniting a tempestuous cadence that bewitches all who dare to witness it. As the moonlight weaves through the canopy of ancient trees, the devil dances, his movements a hypnotic blend of grace and menace. It is a chilling spectacle, a seductive invitation into a realm where dark desires intertwine with forbidden melodies, and where souls are both ensnared and enthralled. Welcome to the infernal performance of The Devil's Dance, where salvation and damnation collide in a sinister waltz of fate. In the quaint little village of Briar's Gulch, nestled amidst rolling hills that look out over the ocean, there stands an old tavern that bears witness to many a dark tale. Its name, the Inferno's Embrace, was whispered in hushed tones, for it was said that the devil himself visited the establishment when the moon hung low and the night wore its darkest veil. On many a moonlit eve, young musicians find themselves drawn to the tavern's eerie allure. As the fog rolls in from the ocean, swallowing the starlit sky, the fires are stoked and the whiskey is poured. The air inside becomes heavy with anticipation, a tingling electricity that raises the hair on one's neck. The flickering candles cast eerie silhouettes on the walls, and the smell of aged oak mingles with an alluring hint of brimstone. The tavern fills with a motley crew of patrons, their eyes glimmering with equal parts curiosity and trepidation. The musicians who come here to play may be seasoned performers, but some have never played anywhere before. New to their instruments, they come here to feel their awkward fingers transform with dark magic, to play symphonies of structure and form. Benjamin was one of these. He'd been given his grandfather's violin and felt the need to carry on the tradition of music that ran in his family. It had been his grandfather's, but before that it had been his great-grandfather's, and his father's before that. A long legacy of violinists had passed through his lineage, but he'd never had money for lessons and had nothing he could trade. His own father had not had time for music, nor did he care to encourage it in his son. So Benjamin came with the hope that he'd find a master willing to take him on as a student. In the tavern, an ominous silence descended upon the room. The devil, dressed in a tailored suit as black as midnight, appeared before the crowd. His sharp, penetrating gaze bore into Benjamin's soul, beckoning him forward. With trepidation and reverence, Benjamin cradled his grandfather's violin in his hands, feeling the weight of ancestral history. He raised the violin to his shoulder. As he drew the bow across the strings, a shiver traveled down his spine, for he knew not what to expect. But as the haunting melody filled the room, his fingers seemed to move with a life of their own, guided by the master's eyes. The notes wove together and filled the room with the most beautiful song Benjamin had ever heard. It was a spectral symphony that echoed in the depths of his soul and found its way through his body to the instrument. Summoned by the music's irresistible allure, the devil himself began to dance, his elegant form swirling and contorting to the violin's melancholic refrain. His steps became intertwined with Benjamin's melody and became a macabre duet, an unholy harmony of sound and movement, a blend of grace and menace. The devil's eyes glowed with delight at the hypnotic spell woven by the musician's deft fingers. The music swelled, its notes weaving through the hearts of those present, tapping into their deepest desires and darkest secrets. It was a seductive invitation to embrace their hidden desires and relinquish their inhibitions. The patrons began a frantic dance, clawing at each other's clothing and bodies. It was as if the dance had stripped away their humanity and consumed them with unquenchable longing. Fueled by a surge of instinct, Benjamin halted his playing and leaped from the stage, his violin clutched tightly to his chest. The room fell into disarray, a cacophony of shattered illusions and gasps of realization. The devil's eyes blazed with fury, but Benjamin had dared to defy the allure, to break free from the dance of damnation. As he fled the tavern, Benjamin could hear the devil's enraged howl echoing behind him. He ran as fast as he could through the dark forest, trying to escape the nightmare he had just witnessed. The night had fallen into complete darkness, and try as he might, Benjamin could not find a path that led anywhere but back to the tavern. He ran until he had no more strength, no more breath. He fell at last, panting and trying to catch his breath. He felt a hand on his shoulder and heard a whisper in his ear, "Play for me." The legend of the Devil's Dance endures to this day, whispered in the village of Briar's Gulch. It is said that when the moon is full and the fog rolls in from the ocean, you can hear the haunting strains of a violin filtering through the trees in an infernal waltz. Red by Ginger Winters. The cabin in the woods had been abandoned for years, but one night a candle burned in the window. It was a welcome sight, for she was lost, thirsty and hungry, and so very cold. It was late December. She should be home, helping prepare the holiday dinner. There would be no feast this year, unless it was she. A feast for the hungry wolf who was surely following her tracks, waiting for her to fall. She knew all about the wolves. She had grown up in these woods, and the stories had haunted her since childhood. Children disappeared from their yards. Women went missing while hanging clothes on the line. Men who ventured too far into the woods while deer hunting or chopping down trees for firewood were never seen again. Their bodies never found, no traces left behind. Though none of the townspeople had ever seen a wolf, They often heard a low growling just over their shoulder. Upon turning, no beast was ever there. Some claimed to hear a rustle in the bushes that seemed to follow them as they quickly returned home, yet the wolves remained unseen. Others had glimpsed glowing yellow eyes in the darkness, and what else but a wolf would have eyes like that? For generations, the stories had kept young children from wandering out of their yards, and wolves remained the subject of nearly all their nightmares. That morning, she had only meant to gather an armful of wood for the fire and check on the chickens, but a glimpse of red moving quickly through the trees had caught her eye. It must be a child from the nearby village, out gathering a Yule log for the fire. The child appeared to be darting through the trees, as nimble as a young fawn. Her fear of wolves had always stopped her from crossing the boundary from her parents' little farm into the menacing dark woods. But she ran after the young child anyway, her fear abated by her curiosity. It made her forget her task and drew her further into the woods than she had ever been before. It was already dark before she realized she was hopelessly lost. She glimpsed a faint light just ahead in the trees, and upon drawing closer, she saw it was a small cabin with the faint glow of a candle burning in the window. It looked to be abandoned, and surely no one lived this deep in the forest, and yet the light beckoned her to draw closer, seek shelter, escape this bitter cold night. Surely some kind soul had lit that solitary candle and would offer a cup of warm tea to a scared and weary traveler, a bit of bread, a soft bed, and protection through this dark, cold night. Perhaps she would find the child dressed in red, or her mother who would offer her a warm meal, a father who would help guide her back home upon daylight. The wind stirred through the branches as she ran to the cabin door. It was slightly ajar, yet looked as if it had not been fully opened in a very long time. She could see a thick layer of dirt and leaves littering the floor. The soft glow of candlelight caused shadows to dance across the room and took her a moment to adjust her eyes. "Hello?" she called out, but there was no answer. She gave the door a hefty push and stepped inside. In the window, the glow from the small candle gave off just enough light to illuminate the inside of the cabin. It dripped wax onto the sill and down the wall, pooling at the foot of a little wood stove in the corner, waiting to be lit with a box of kindling by its side. An old iron kettle hung from a hook on the wall. Against the wall was a bed covered with a quilt and pillows. As she slowly turned, surveying the rest of the room, she saw a rocking chair in the darkest corner, piled high with furs. She thought she glimpsed a movement ever so slight, and wondered if her eyes were playing tricks on her. In disbelief, she watched as a face slowly began to appear from under the pile of furs, an apparition coming to life in the form of a very old woman. She looked ancient, as old as the forest itself. Deeply wrinkled, the old woman's appearance took on more the look of a wild animal than a human. The grandmother's body was taking form, defining bone in her skeletal frame, wrapped in the fur of a wolf. She felt something brush past her, lightly touching her skin, and all the hairs on her body became electrified. Terror flooded through her body. She felt it again, this time a lick on her cheek. She whipped around, frantically searching the room for the source of the touches. A nibble on her neck. She turned to run to the door, but it slammed shut before she could reach for the handle. Golden eyes peered at her in the uneven flickering of the candle's flame, and she heard it growl. But it was not a wolf. It was a girl, dressed all in red, her lips curled in a snarl. "We've been waiting for you," growled the little girl in the red cloak. The old woman licked her lips, and grinned with a mouthful of long, sharp teeth. A barely audible whisper came from her mouth. Dinner. There are things much scarier than wolves deep in the forest. The Owl by Ginger Winters. The three boys had been fishing down at the slough all morning, drinking beer, telling tales, nothing unusual. They spent most their Saturdays down at the slough. Buck's dad was hard-headed and mean, so Buck had a habit of leaving home early before his dad was awake. He'd jump in the farm truck and go pick up his buddies for a day of fishing and drinking. Sunday was chore day, but Saturdays were all his to do with as he pleased. Buck had inherited his dad's mean streak. He liked to fight. He liked to kill things. He couldn't wait till hunting season started. He didn't even care about the meat. He wanted to see the suffering in his prey's eyes, just like his daddy did to his mama when he had too much to drink. He was surprised that his buddy Arlo liked to hang around him. He hadn't had many friends growing up, and now that he was in high school, he had fought just about every boy in his school, and you don't make friends like that. But Arlo was different. Nothing got that boy down. He always had a smile on his face, no matter how many times it had been punched. Arlo's little brother had to tag along, but he was quiet and didn't cause much trouble. He wasn't quite right in the head, but that didn't matter to Buck. He was 14, and that made him old enough to drink. In Buck's eyes, that was all that mattered. Nightfall was coming on, and all the beer was gone. Buck didn't really want to return home, knowing his dad had probably been drinking too, and his mom would be suffering the consequences. The boys had built a campfire, and the crickets were providing a nice background of music. Why go home? Heck, no one would care. "Hey, Arlo, you see that new girl just come to town?" Arlo had definitely seen the new girl. What boy in town hadn't? She was pretty. The kind of girl that turned a guy's head when she walked into the room and set his blood boiling in his jeans. "I'm gonna get me that girl," Buck said. "You ain't got a shot, Buckwheat. She's way out of your league," Arlo stated with a grin. "Yeah, well, she ain't never had it as good as what I can give her," he remarked with an obscene gesture that guys like Buck use a little too often. "I know where she lives. I seen her walking home from school. She lives just past the old Crenshaw farm. I seen her take that path through the woods right there between Crenshaw's and the old mill. I figure she has to pass right by that mill to get to her place. We just hide out at the mill, and she'll never see us coming." Buck had it all planned out in his mind. "But Buck," Arlo tried to interject, but Buck punched him in the shoulder and knocked him into the truck. Arlo knew better than to argue with him. He glanced over at his little brother, Jesse, but Jess was just sitting there staring off into space, as usual. "Come on, let's go home," Arlo said. He hoped it was only the beer making his friend think bad thoughts, and that maybe he'd sleep it off and forget all about it by morning. Arlo was used to Buck's bad behavior, and although he usually didn't agree with whatever scheme Buck had dreamt up, he knew better than to disagree with him. Buck drove the boys home and then cut the lights on the pickup as he drove up his long driveway, hoping his dad wouldn't see him coming. He sneaked in the back door and up to his room. His dad must already be passed out on the sofa, his mom probably sitting in the kitchen crying. That was the routine, and it never seemed to change. Buck couldn't get that pretty girl off his mind, and the more he thought about her, the more he convinced himself that his plan was a good one. To hell with Arlo. He'd have her all to himself. Morning songbirds woke Buck, and he rose to do the Sunday chores around the farm. It had been in his dad's family for 2 generations, and that was a part of the reason his daddy drank so much. He had never wanted to be a farmer. He resented his parents dying and leaving it to him, but he had grown up on the farm and didn't know how to do much else. So they tilled the fields and planted corn and raised hogs. Buck hated it too. There was no way he'd take over the farm when his dad died. He'd rather die than be a farmer and raise stinking hogs. As he ambled through the normal routine, he couldn't get his mind off that new girl. She was his prize, and the sooner he could have her, the better. So he figured he'd cut school early, go hide out at the mill, wait for her to come home, then surprise her. He didn't think much past that. Consequences of his actions was not something he'd even consider. They simply didn't exist in his mind. Monday came all too quickly. Buck made a big show of leaving for school, even said bye to his mom. He jumped in the farm truck and picked up Arlo and Jessie and headed to school. Nothing was mentioned to his friends. This was his alone. He left at lunchtime. No one would think that strange. He often drove down to the DQ for a burger, so the fact that he left the school grounds was no big deal. But leaving his friends behind was. That worried Arlo. But Buck drove away before he could grab his brother and walk to the truck. He drove out to the mill along the back pasture, hid his truck in a low stand of brush on the opposite side of the path, and waited for the girl. They called her Morning Glory. She'd always been a bit of a dreamer, a strange child that enjoyed being outdoors, no matter the weather or the time of day. Not one for dolls, she befriended the animals of the forest, always bringing home baby birds with broken wings, little squirrels who'd lost their mamas, even deer followed her home. She surprised her mom by digging up worms and then feeding them to her baby birds, and she'd go to great lengths to save a spider whose web had been destroyed by the broom. They bought her a puppy, a little scrawny pip of a thing, and when her dad took the shotgun and went after the coyote who'd grabbed the pup, she was more concerned about the coyote's safety than her own little puppy. She seemed to understand the cycle of death and rebirth and survival of the fittest. Glory never seemed to have any friends at school. She was quiet, shy, introspective. She was a good student and always turned her work in on time, but the teachers noted that she wouldn't participate with the other kids in their games or at recess. She would stand under a tree, talking with the birds. The other kids started making fun of her, and boys found great delight in tormenting her, pulling her pigtails, calling her names, and even though kids can be very mean, she never seemed to notice. She was a master at ignoring everyone and everything and lived in her own little world. Her parents' decision to move from Oregon to this little town in Idaho was primarily due to her father's new job, but they hoped that it would also be good for Glory to live in the country again and be around other teenagers who lived more of a rural life. Maybe they'd understand one another. Maybe she could actually develop some friendships or have a boyfriend. They had lived on the outskirts of Portland this past year, but their safe little community was now overrun with homeless camps, and they didn't feel very safe anymore. They had moved around a lot, from one town to another, always in search of a better opportunity. Idaho was different, rural and quiet with a strong 4-H program. They introduced her to the new school and signed her up in 4-H. She'd always communed with wild animals. Now maybe she'd find the same pleasure in taking care of domestic farm animals. It was worth a try. They'd get her some rabbits and some chickens. The first 4-H meeting was Monday night. They told her to stay after school, sent her with a sandwich, and offered to pick her up after the meeting. She objected, as usual, preferring to walk home, even if it would already be dusk. This little town felt so safe, so why not let her have her walk? Glory sat through the uncomfortable meeting, staring through the window. It wasn't that the meeting was uncomfortable. It was having to be around a group of kids she didn't know and didn't fit in with. She couldn't wait till it was over. Her 4-H leader didn't like the idea of her walking home alone, but she assured her that she was quite fine, did this all the time, and abruptly turned and walked away. She savored her walk through the quiet streets, listening to the barn swallows who were just starting their calling, and the swooping of the bats catching mosquitoes. The path through the woods was her favorite part of the walk. It was not a shortcut, and in fact, since it led past the old mill, she had to cut back through a pasture to reach her house. It would have been much easier to just stay on the road, but even though it was beginning to grow dark, she wouldn't miss her walk through the woods for anything. Buck had grown tired of waiting. Why didn't she come through here? He'd been watching her for weeks now, and she always took this path. He had dozed off, leaning up against the tree where he hid in ambush, and was angry at himself. Had she passed right by while he was sleeping, and he missed his opportunity? Now it was getting dark. He swore a few choice words under his breath, then headed towards his pickup to drive back home. Just as he reached the old farm truck, he thought he glimpsed a movement through the trees. He paused, saw it again. It was her. He hurried back to his hiding spot and waited. She was definitely not in a hurry. She had stopped, looking up into the trees, and then walked a few more steps, stopped and glanced up again. It looked like she was talking to the birds. What a strange girl, he thought, but mostly he just wanted her to hurry up. She walked up in front of the mill and stood there, like she was waiting for him. Ah, this is going to be fun, he thought to himself. He crept up behind her, and just as he reached for her, she turned, smiled, and let out an unearthly call. It wasn't a scream. It was more of a hoot sound. It took him off guard, but he couldn't miss his opportunity, so he grabbed for her. At exactly that moment, he heard a swoosh past his face and felt something sharp rip across his head. The largest owl he had ever seen was beating his wings in front of him, tearing at his face with his sharp beak, digging his razor-sharp talons into his skin. He waved his arms to protect his face and yelled at his attacker. The girl didn't run. She didn't even move. She just stood there, staring at him. He reached for her again. This time he was angry. He never heard the beating wings coming at him, but he felt the talons rip his throat. He gasped, grabbing at his neck, and felt the blood oozing through his fingers. But still the girl just stood there. It was maddening, and he was furious. He grabbed for her, but again, the talons ripped across his face, and he whirled around looking for the bird. He attempted one last time to grab the girl, and he fell at her feet as the owl ripped into his flesh. He was writhing on the ground, trying to protect his face as a giant bird pecked at his eyes. He screamed for help, but the girl just stood there, watching. Finally, he had no more strength to fight. It was as if the gaze of the girl held him there, unable to move, unable to resist the feasting that had begun. The next day at school, Arlo didn't see his friend, nor the next day or the next. The old farm truck was found out near the old mill, but there was no sign of Buck, not even a stitch of clothing. No one ever questioned the girl. No one but Arlo had any reason to. And he wasn't going to ask any questions. Thank you for listening to this week's story, and I hope you'll join us next week as we bring you more great classic tales on Friday Night Frights. And until then, have a great week, everyone.